Howdy everybody, I appreciate you being here. So for today's video, I'm going to use this chameleon I came across on Instagram from Camouflage Creations as inspiration for painting this two-piece wooden trout lure. I'm also going to show you some of my painting techniques, including airbrush settings, which will hopefully answer some of the questions I've been getting on the subject. Now this is not a full build video, so if you want to see how I made this lure, you can check it out at this link above. Let's get started. So this is our starting point. As you can see, I've already got it carved, sealed. I've got the ballast installed, lip, hardware, all that stuff. I don't have the joint glued in just yet because I want to be able to paint inside here and get this piece completed, and then I'll do final assembly at the very end. Now that I've got that done and I've got these attached to my clamps that go on my drying wheel, I'm ready to prime. I'm just going to use this regular automotive primer. Just want to give you a quick rundown on my setup here before I get started spraying. I've got a regular box fan and it's pointed away from me so that it's actually sucking the air towards it. And I'm going to put a regular household filter to suck all the extra spray into this paper filter and trap those particulates in this filter. On top of that, I'm also going to be wearing a respirator and I'm going to open the garage door so that I get some ventilation in the room. Once we get that first coat of primer on there, we can discover a few areas that might need a little sanding. Here's a little spot by the tail that might need a little work, and then around some of these fill holes you can still see the outline. So we'll do a little bit of sanding around those areas, and then maybe a little bit more around on the head where it's just a tad rough. Now for this particular lure, we're using a lot of pretty basic colors. I'm going to stick with some opaques here to start with. I can see some red in the head area and along the back and maybe along the belly. We've got, of course, yellow fading up into that. And then green up at the top here. And then, of course, our stripes are blue. And I can even see a little black in it, or possibly an extremely dark blue. So we may do a little bit of mixing here, but I'm going to start with just some basic opaques. So as I'm looking at this, I think what I'm going to do is start with the background. We're going to start with all those colors. I'm going to ignore the stripes for now, and we'll come back and add those later. I kind of like to start with my lighter colors first, and then work my way to the darker ones. So let's get the yellow and green started, and then we can fade those into the red. Next color I want to do is this green, and you can see that it's not a really dark green like this. It's more of a yellow green. So what we're going to do is mix these together. You kind of got two options here. One is you can take a little container like this and mix it all up and then pour that into your airbrush. That's a good plan if you're going to be doing lots of lures, or if you're going to need more of that color. In this particular case, I'm only going to need to do that little stripe along the top once, so I don't need any extra paint. So what I'm going to do is just mix it up in the airbrush. Let's put 10 drops. I like to count drops. That's the easiest way for me to keep track of what I'm doing. And then we're going to put 1 drop of green. These dark colors will really dramatically change the color, so you don't need a lot of dark color. Now, if I needed to make some more of that, that's pretty easy to remember. 10 drops of yellow, 1 drop of green, that's easy to remember. Or you can write it down. Now I'm going to move on to the red, and you can see on both of these examples here, the head is primarily red, and then it kind of goes down in the chest area a little bit. And then I'm going to do a little super thin stripe down the belly, and then also super thin stripe here on the back. We're going to be using this opaque red. But I think now's as good a time as any to show you about thinning. So with these paints, what I've found is that they generally come pretty thick from the factory. If it's too thick, what it can do is spatter and be real spattery. And if it's too thin, it can pool up when you spray it, which you don't want either. So what you want is something right in the middle there where it's nice and thin, thin enough to spray into fine particles, but it doesn't pool up. And so the way you get there is to use this reducer. And I wish there was a really great ratio that I could tell you. I don't personally know one. But what I do is I put some in there, and you can see just how thick it is. It doesn't really move around a whole lot. So I'm just going to eyeball it and put some in there until it's pretty runny. And also, if you put too much reducer in there, it'll be more like a transparent paint. If you get it just right, then it'll give you a perfect gradient between your colors. Let me show you where it's at right now. It's just kind of sloshy. I don't know if you're going to be able to see that too well on the camera here. But it's a good bit thinner. I'll show you what it looks like when we spray it. Could potentially be a little bit thinner, but I'm going to roll with that. I want to kind of briefly go over my painting setup. And as you can see here, I just have a small pancake compressor here. And then I've got my quick connect line that goes over to my pressure regulator. You can see that that line from the compressor comes into here, which is the regulator. And then this line goes to my airbrush. And what's really neat about this regulator is I'm able to fine tune how much pressure I use on my airbrush, which can be very useful depending on what you're doing. I usually leave this set at about 30 psi, and then you can lock it into place like that. So the airbrush that I'm currently using is this Iwata Eclipse. It's the HPCS model. I'm really liking this airbrush. It's very sensitive and it's able to do pretty good detail work. However, when I was first starting with airbrushing, I got this much less expensive master airbrush off of Amazon. And if memory is correct, it came with 3 different needles and nozzle sizes, like a small, medium, and large, I guess. And I was able to do a lot of lure making with this brush alone. So if you're just starting out, you don't need to buy an expensive airbrush. You can get started with a much less expensive model like this one and learn the ins and outs of airbrushing and just kind of get a feel for it without investing too much right out the gate. Just real quick, I want to show you how I clean my airbrush, but I want to put a little disclaimer on that because I'm a self-taught airbrusher, and so this may very well be completely and entirely wrong, but this is how I do it and I've had good luck with it. So the tools that I need to clean out my airbrush are a bowl of water here. I also get one of these little suckers. It's like a nose dropper or something that I got from the drugstore. An old paintbrush. And then there's this tank. I don't really remember what they call it, but basically it captures all of the spray, and it also makes a really good stand for holding your airbrush. So between colors, you're going to want to clean out your airbrush, and I start with the eyedropper. And I just kind of submerge the tip of the airbrush into the water and I spray that out. Suck in more, spray it out. I'm just trying to get as much of that paint out of there as I can. Okay, sometimes it'll dry in there like that a little bit. So I fill the reservoir with water and then I use my brush to kind of brush that away. Okay, so once I've got that fairly well cleaned out, I do another dip. And I spray a little air through it. And then if you put your finger over the end and give it a little bit of air, you can back flush it a few times. And I like to go back and forth. Sometimes I'll spray water forward through it and then I'll backwash. Then I'll put a little bit of this airbrush cleaner and do the same thing once I've got it as good as I can with the water. Spray some through. Once I've done all that, I can twist the end off. I can take the needle out and I can dip it in the water and then very carefully clean it with a paper towel. Okay, then here in the nozzle end, I'll take a Q-tip, dip it in the water and swab out that nozzle area. I'll put a little bit more of this airbrush cleaner in there, and then I'll take my brush and swab around inside there without the needle in it. That way I can get kind of underneath where the needle sits. And then I'll put the needle back in. And without going all the way to the end, you can kind of feel where the needle hits the nozzle. So without going quite that far, I kind of work it back and forth, and what I'm doing is I'm getting a little bit of that paint that went up the needle slot there. Just a few times, and then I'll gently put it up against the nozzle and then reassemble. And then spray it out. And that's pretty much it. That's my airbrush cleaning regimen. Ready to put on these stripes here, these blue stripes. The best way I've found to get kind of an organic, natural looking stripe is to take my piece of tape here and tear it down the middle, and I purposely make it zigzag and go back and forth like so. And then what I'm going to do is use that rough edge as the outside of my stripe. And I'm going to turn this around to do the opposite side of the stripe. Okay, so I've got these taped off here, and did a little bit of detail work here on the face. You know, you can see some little like sunbursts here. So I got a couple of those on there on each side. If you want to support the channel and look good doing it, you can now get your official Zimtex merchandise. Just click on the store tab or the link to my website in the video description. There you can find everything Zimtex, including gear, links to the products I use, and other cool stuff. So really what we've done up to this point is get a base to paint on. This is going to be kind of the underlayment of all of the detail work that we're going to do over the top of it. What I want to do next here is to put a little bit of a clear coat on it just to protect the work that we've done so far before we get into brush work. And what I'm going to use for that is this Kamar varnish from Krylon. I'm going to spray a couple of thin coats of that on there, and it locks in the work that I've done so far. And if I were to make any mistakes moving forward, it'd be a lot easier to undo those with this little clear coat layer on it. For this detail work, I'm going to be using this wet palette that I got. It's from Army Painter, and it's actually a pretty handy little kit here. It's got an organizer, and you can put all your brushes and tools in there. It does not come with those, but it's got a cool place to hold all that. And it comes with two of these reusable soft sponge things. You just put it in the tray and then fill the tray with some water and let it soak it up. And then it comes with a package full of these thin tissue paper pieces, and you put that directly on top. And then I like to kind of smooth it down a little bit. Now pour out the excess water so that it's just damp. And then as long as you keep that moist, you can put your paint on it, you can mix your paint on it, and it keeps it from drying out so quickly. And then when you're not using it, you can put this tray back on there, and it keeps it moist inside of there. So it allows you to work with your paint for an extended period of time, versus if you use just a regular plastic tray or something like that, it'll dry out super fast. I'm adding a white spot over each of these dark spots because I'm wanting to have bright red spots. And if I were to put red paint over this darker spot, it wouldn't be the bright red that I'm looking for. So I need to put a little white on there to make that red pop. So this is the green that I sprayed on the tail fin here, and you can see it came out more yellow, and that may be because it doesn't have a white background to work with. Whatever the case, I'm really just getting a red and a yellow here. So I think I'm going to go back over this green area here with maybe some fluorescent green. That may be a mistake, but I'm really wanting some bright green on that tail, so I'm going to give it a shot and see what it looks like. But before I do that, I need to put some more of that Kamar varnish over this so that I can lock that into place, and then I'll go back and paint over it. So I'll get back to you after I've sprayed some varnish on there. There we go. That's a lot closer to what I was looking for originally. So one of the things I wanted to do while I've got the airbrush going is get a little bit more orange in this throat area. Now, one of the things that you'll see is this picture printed out on my printer a lot more orange than the real thing. So I'm going to put that over here for comparison. But what you can see is this is pretty red, and I don't mind that, but I think I'm going to add a little bit of orange on this throat area here. And so what I've done is I've mixed up a pretty dark orange in my airbrush here, and we're just going to lightly mist that over the throat area. So I'm ready to clear coat this lure. Ordinarily, I would use a two-part epoxy to cover the whole thing, and that would be a really good solid clear coat. But I don't really want to use that on this lure because that paint that I've put on there has created a really interesting texture over the whole lure, which I think gives it a little bit extra pop. So what I'm going to use is this KBS Diamond Clear Spray. It's not going to be as tough as a two-part epoxy, but it will protect the paint and waterproof it, and it'll also preserve that texture. I'm going to set this aside and let this cure before I try and assemble the whole thing. Since I didn't do my traditional clear coat over this with resin, I'm going to go around this lip, the edges of this lip, and seal that lip really well to the body. Now that these are cured, we can go ahead and attach the two pieces together. I've mixed up some more epoxy. Just going to put it on both of those. Alright, and then we'll just let that cure and it'll be done. I highly recommend you check out Camouflage Creations on Instagram. They've got a really cool page and it's filled with beautiful chameleons of all kinds of colors. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so I can make more of the content you want to see. Also, feel free to leave a comment. I welcome your feedback and appreciate all of your support. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.